You would never think that the scrapping of vehicles back in 1945 and in the 50s would actually save a lot of historical vehicles. But what if I told you that most of the German-made vehicles you see today came at one point from a scrapyard or military range, and were destined to be cut or shot into little pieces. In today's video I want to focus on these vehicles that were actually saved simply because they were left to be slowly cut up into little pieces. After the war, the battlefields were littered with abandoned and destroyed vehicles. Many of these were of course heavy vehicles that were not as easy to remove. A lot of these vehicles would have been pushed off the road into ditches and bushes just to get the supply chain moving as fast and easy as possible. But this would make some vehicles even harder to remove later on. And some of the artifacts today, like these two Pak 40 guns, came from these dump pits. And I can tell you that there is still an entire Tiger II tank buried in one of these pits today, with the French having no interest in getting the entire thing out. But back then it was just an easy way to get rid of some of the junk that was littered all over the battlefield. Probably if you watch some of the metal detecting channels, you know about this, because they will find a lot of these pits filled with weapons. Now, to speed up this process of cleaning up Europe, the Allies would set up scrapyards to get these vehicles scrapped and their own vehicles repaired. The Allied engineers would go around collecting these vehicles, but sometimes it did not really work out, and most of the vehicles you see today in the Ardennes were just left behind by tired and cold GIs that were offered a bottle of booze to leave the tank where it sits. But that's not really what this video is about. We're having a look at the vehicles that actually made it to the scrapyard. If we talk about these scrapyards, the Troon scrapyard in Normandy is probably the most well-known one. Several vehicles today came from this location. Most well-known vehicle said to come from this scrapyard is the so-called Franken Tiger. But this vehicle actually did not come from this scrapyard at all, and the entire story is false. I made an entire video about this, but to keep it short, the chassis came from a military range in Russia, and the Huber collection rebuilt it using the front from another Tiger that also came from Russia. But it is true that some smaller parts came from the Troon scrapyard. But because of the immense amount of vehicles collected, a lot of these vehicles would sit on the scrapyard for a long time. Most of them were eventually collected in 1977 by Colonel Michel Aubry, who convinced both the French military and the local political authorities to start up a collection, which would eventually become the biggest tank museum in the world. Some of the vehicles that came from the Troon scrapyard that are notable are the Panzer II and the Luchs. Some other vehicles collected are now in the Bayeux Museum, like a rare Flak Panzer 38 and a Wesp. Others ended up in the collection of André Becker and Michel Leloup, which most of the Leloup collection is now on display in the Overlord Museum. But going back to the Saumur Museum, with the majority of tanks in their collection coming from other scrapyards or military ranges, a lot of German tanks were actually used in the French army after the war and were saved in this manner. And it would seem crazy today, but the Saumur Museum actually owned 8 Panther tanks at one moment in time. Most of them were given away for silly trades or political gains, but they still own half of them. The other 4 can be viewed in the Jordan Tank Museum, the Sinsheim Museum, the Overlord Museum and the Australian Armour and Artillery Museum. The last being of real interest here is the Australian Armour Museum, which has done an amazing job in building up their entire collection of German armored vehicles with parts of German vehicles collected from scrapyards and dump pits found all over the world. And I would recommend their YouTube channel. It's really interesting to see the military vehicle numbers being doubled over the last decade, just from all the scrap metal that wasn't scrapped and was dumped or forgotten. And it lets you think that with the right people you can literally build up an entire vehicle collection from scrap, and in maybe another 10 years there will be an entire tank museum built up just from parts that were left behind after the war. But that will be it for this video. If you want to support the channel, think about hitting me up on my Patreon page or become a channel member. I will see you in the next one.